The world is saved. The living room's dark, save for light being cast from the big TV screen and the imminent sunrise that's teasing the one starry sky with whispers of morning.
Hey, Mike.
Hello.
I appreciate that you come up out of the basement like every once in a while to record a Final Fantasy episode.
Yes. It's Metroid and Final Fantasy for me.
Yeah. You know what you like. So that's good, I guess.
We can't go an episode without acknowledging I am always present for every episode.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, it's funny you remind us of that statement that is true and not a long-running gag, because I was just looking at my calendar when we were scheduling this recording, and I saw that I think Sunday, as of this recording, so the 11th, will be 10 years of podcasting. I was like, holy crap. And Mike has been there for every single episode. I know. Can you believe
a lot
it?
of work existing.
Yeah, I had a very tough conversation with George at one point about like how absolutely trivial it would be to make an AI model of our voices. Like wouldn't even be hard. Like one episode would probably be enough, and there's hundreds.
And then just train it on your content and have it generate new episodes that sound like things you would say.
Utterly horrifying. Was it Planet Money? One of those NPR shows did that exact thing, and their subject matter is complicated. So there were like a bunch of factual errors, and they said like the pacing was kind of off and stuff. But I mean, if you just put the radio on in the background, you wouldn't notice. If you just walked into a coffee shop and NPR was playing, you would not be able to say like, oh, this is fake.
Yeah, the fact that it was that close at all is just like, oh God, what are we about to be living in?
And the amount of people who knew the presenters and were still like, oh my God, that's not really you speaking. Like, to me, that's the terrifying part, because a human could write the words and then the robot says them and it sounds, oh God, it's terrifying. Anyway, we played
this
a
is
video
not a Flipping
game.
Tables episode.
No, it's not. We played, oh God, could you imagine what those episodes would have been like? I feel like Jon Stewart getting out of TV news before Trump, like, ugh. We played a game. We played Final Fantasy Mystic Quest.
Is it a game?
I mean, we're about to spend an hour on that exact point.
Yes.
This was a listener request, shockingly from multiple people. Multiple people have strong nostalgia for this game. Some other games that I like really mattered to me, like almost nobody had ever even heard of. But then this, multiple requests. Came out in October of 1992 on the Super Nintendo. And the summary, and this is from the original marketing material, is a simplified role-playing game designed for the entry-level player. And that's, yup. Yes.
I remember because I had some magazine subscriptions at the time, like EGM or something, that I remember there was like a full page ad that had like a brain. And it was just, I can't remember the marketing copy, but it was just like, buckle up, buddy. You're going to, like, anyone can play this one. This one's easy enough for you. And it's like, it was just really condescending, which has kind of been the enduring vibe, as far as I know, is like Japanese Final Fantasy developers were just like, Americans can't handle our games. We need to make one that is anyone can win.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I wonder, was anyone converted? Like, I wonder if this was their first Final Fantasy, and then they were like, yeah. And then they went to the rest of the series, and like, this was their slow ramp, because that was the hope, right? The hope is this will make someone a fan of our series. But for me, coming at it from the other direction, where I had already played 1 and then US2 and US3, US3 being like maybe my favorite game of all time, like definitely up there. And then to play this, I was just like, huh? Like, what is happening?
The story I want to believe is no, it didn't convert anyone. And instead of like talking down to people and settling for less, I think it's Final Fantasy 3 and Chrono Trigger calling people up to the heights of RPG that converted people, no matter how easy or hard.
I like that. It's like, oh, look at the story you could get if only you could figure out this complicated system.
We inspired you to rise to this level rather than just dabbling in the mud with you.
So what
who
was
knows what we thought of this game? We'll find out.
Yeah, it's a total mystery. What was your nostalgia experience for Final Fantasy Mystic Quest?
Well, I mean, the main memory was that ad really setting the tone about what the game is. But it was definitely a rental. It was not a game we owned, even though it was also marketed as being a cheaper game, as being $40 and $1992 instead of most Super Nintendo games were like between $65 and $80. There's a lot of variance back then on cartridge games.
I think that might have been a holdover from the Atari era when anybody could manufacture a cartridge, and so prices were just all over the damn place. And then the Nintendo seal of quality came in and was like, nope.
Yeah. And I think the Super Nintendo games varied a lot more on how much memory was in them. So maybe it was just literally the cost of the extra memory. It was like, we're passing this on.
Yeah, they had like the FX chip and like the M3 or whatever.
Always bragging about how many megabits each game had.
And they continued that for a while where they were like, this game's so big, you got to shove an extra thing into your N64 controller for it to even work.
And then Sony's like, it's a CD, it's hundreds of megabytes.
Yeah,
just shut up.
And then again, actually, the same company, Square, came back and said 4 CDs. One ain't gonna do it, buddy. My experience of this game was my friend owned this, the one who had like all of the games. And so I played it at his house, and I actually misremembered it. There were things that were not in this game that I must be thinking of other games of that era. Probably that I also played over at his house, which is why they're all in like one big soup. But I had a crystal clear memory of 2 things. One, not particularly liking it. Like at the time, I remembered it not landing for me. And then for years and years and years after, I just remember it being a joke, right? Like that was the not real Final Fantasy that everybody made fun of. And I considered myself a big fan of the series. So like, oh, that was the dumb one for babies, right? Even though I didn't really have super clear memories of playing it. And for whatever reason, the box art, there's a lot of iconic box art, but for some reason, this box art is just burned into my memory. It's like a hill. What would you call it? It's like a jetting out cliff, like up at an angle. And the hero whose canonical name is Benjamin is like standing, and he's like holding up the sword, and he looks kind of like the Rocketeer. Like it's a sort of like Art Deco-y kind of painting style on the cover art, and it says Final Fantasy Mystic Quest in these like gold thinned, also sort of weirdly Art Deco-y letters. Like it's very striking.
It's where Symbol was held up in Lion King.
Yes,
I think.
Yes, it is exactly. Thank you. It is a Simba Cliff, which is now the official geological name for that. But something about the box art has just always stuck with me. And it's a weird, like, emotional conflict of like, I really like this box art, but I remember this as the stupid Final Fantasy everybody made fun of.
Mm-hmm. And we're here to prove them all wrong.
Wrong? Maybe? I don't know. We're allowed to have opinions and state objective facts. And sometimes they get confused. Before we dive into it proper, if you like what we're doing and you want to hear Mike on more episodes, you can go to nostalgiagoggles.audio, subscribe to the show. There's a feedback thing on there where you can get in touch with us, Discord and email and all that good crap. There used to be social media, but that's no, we're not doing that anymore. You can also request games and ask questions for Safety Goggles and all that good stuff. You can leave ratings and reviews You can tell a friend. I think word of mouth is still better than anonymous ratings and reviews, but both are good. And if you want to go real crazy, you can become a patron on the Patreon. Links in the show notes and on the website for all that stuff. If you support at a high enough level, we will shout you out on the show. So we need to first thank our 4-bit portables, David, Frederick, Jacob, Joshua, Keith, and Martin, our 8-bit classics, Yarno, Jay Brent, John, and Kevin, and our 16-bit hero, Michael. Not you, Michael, different Michael. And I think if George was willing to talk on this episode, he would say, for $1,000, I will finish playing Mystic Quest.
Is that a slap bet or what? Just $1,000.
Yeah. No, for $1,000, I will. For $1,000, George will finish playing Mystic Quest. There you go. That's what happens when he
will
doesn't pick up on
drive
an
to your
episode.
house, get your save file that you can't transfer over the internet, and play from where you left off.
That still would be too much playing. All right, so tell me about the audio visuals.
Yes. And where to begin? I think we'll get into specifics, but I think like just big picture, this game definitely looks like a very early Super Nintendo game, which is, it is early. It's not the earliest. I mean, 92 is like still kind of early, but
it's after Super Mario World and Link to the Past, my dude.
Yeah. And like it kind of looks to me like you upgraded a Game Boy game rather than designed a full 16-bit game. Like I was thinking like if I compare it to Phantasy Star 2 from 1989 on the Genesis, that game has a lot more charm in every like parallel, like the battle scene or just different parts of it. It's not all better, but like it's got so much more like aesthetic amazingness to it. And that was 3 years prior.
Yeah, it feels basic. Like nothing is wrong with it. It just doesn't have a strong sense of self or a strong like art direction, right? Like the graphics in Super Mario World are very simple. They're simpler than these graphics, but they are clear. There's like a clear art direction behind the style and the way things move and are communicated. This feels more like an RPG Maker project, yes. Where it's just like, oh, this is someone's best effort, and by that standard, it's great. But by holding it up next to its peers, you're like, okay, this is maybe art that goes up on the refrigerator, but I'm not gonna like frame it and put it up in the parlor.
Yeah, it's like some of it reminds me of like, well, the overworld part of ActRaiser, not the side-scrolling part, which has really good graphics. Or even like Super Mario All-Stars, which literally are conversions of 8-bit games that don't look bad, but they're not as expressive as like Super Mario World or Yoshi's Island or any of the like truly 16-bit designs.
Yeah, they did also make some art direction changes that are like kind of inexplicable. Like, why is it the over-the-shoulder style sprites in the battles, right? Because Final Fantasy has a very specific heroes on the right, baddies on the left, right? Like all of the 2D ones are like that. And I think that it's because Japanese is read from right to left, right? So like the good guys come first if you are reading the screen from right to left, and then the bad guys come second, right? But this has the over-the-shoulder style that's more like a Phantasy Star.
That's what made me compare it. I was like, but Phantasy Star looks so much better.
So much better.
To lend credence to this is sort of an upgraded Game Boy game. The Final Fantasy Legend games have a vertical orientation. You are fighting a monsters like at the top of the screen.
Are the sprites not in there though?
I don't know if your character sprites made it on the screen because of the menu space. But yeah. I mean, another thing in this game is characters are just constantly strolling in place. And
yes, they do the
that's
march.
Also true of Final Fantasy Legends. So I wonder if there's just like a port over of like, we got to make this real quick for idiots in America.
I mean, yes,
Put color on it and ship it.
that is very possible. I think it's weirdly, it's the style of like Dragon Quest, right? Like Dragon Quest is that same thing, except that your character sprites aren't on screen. So it's like they wanted the simplified, the menus are always at the bottom. Another thing that is just like a bizarre stylistic change. It looks like an old like arcade game where just your health and name and like selected item are just on screen all the time. It just feels so weird to me, but it's not that it's, I think, inherently bad. It does feel reductive for what like the complexity of an RPG typically is in my mind, but it's just so weird to be like, this is an approachable Final Fantasy that will look different for no discernible reason. Like, I don't know what the player gets out of the health is down here and the characters are here, but not there. Like, so like, is it more intuitive? Does that make it more like the nipple? What is happening?
And when you think about like trying to design it dumb, it's like, don't make them do math. Just give them like a health bar that changes color.
Which, because of, I mean, we'll talk about this more when we talk about the combat, but like your health is kind of a nonsense number. You can basically take 2 to 4 hits at any point in the game. And so having the bar get super long, which then there isn't enough space for it, so they have to do the small pips with a row of larger pips.
We switched out your pennies for nickels and dimes.
It's such a weird visual choice. Like, the numbers part just isn't that hard, and if it is, then 80 pips in a row of varying sizes is also not super easy for like someone who is young or with a low games literacy to grasp. Like that, seeing a number out of another number doesn't feel that much harder than 50 yellow pips next to 25 red pips. What did you think? And I'm always curious if you have strong feelings or not whenever we talk about music, but I actually thought the music was pretty good. Music's pretty solid.
The music is one of the, there's some exceptions, but the music's pretty great. Like, there's a couple of themes I'm just like, this is like some like classic rock going on. I just like, I don't know, some Iron Maiden or something, like if it was
it is
played
very
by
guitars.
a real band.
Yeah. Which is, again, doesn't feel super Final Fantasy in my mind, but like it works. It totally works.
Yeah, I mean, the battle music is often kind of metal in Final Fantasies, but not a lot of the other music. Unfortunately, one of the exceptions is the overworld music is like a maybe 4-second loop, and you hear it so often that one grated on me. But it doesn't stop me from saying that a lot of the music is pretty great in this game. It's one of the few like unambiguously bright points.
And they didn't seem to shy away from the complexity. They did shy away from variety, right? There isn't 20 different battle musics depending on where you're getting into combat. There's just the one overworld theme. I think, do all the towns even have the same town theme? Like there's like each thing is handled, but it's not like, oh, this is the dwarves have dwarf town music, and then the elves have elf town music, and then the humans have human town music. It's like, nope, you're in a town, you're in a fight, you're in a dungeon, right? So like you do get quality pieces of music, but repetitive, right? And the overworld theme is the most egregious for sure.
It is sort of like a malicious compliance way, like we did everything you asked and no more.
Also, the overworld theme is just 2 bars that repeat forever.
It's so short, or even if there is a second half, it's so much like the first half that it might as well be the same.
Well, and without random encounters, it's not like you're either sitting on the overworld map because you put the controller down to go get a sandwich, or you are just walking from place to place, which is not super time consuming because there's no overworld or there's no random encounters.
Mhm.
I will say a thing in the audio visuals that I actually do think is not just a good idea, but also executed on pretty well that I'm not sure literally any other Final Fantasy ever attempted to do at this era. The enemies show damage.
Yes.
It's a really simplistic way of doing it where they have like their full health sprite, their hurt sprite, and then when they die, the hurt sprite like fades away. So even if you kill them in one hit, they snap through the hurt sprite, so you still get to see it, and it's kind of cool.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's one of the like probably brightest points of the graphic design of this game is the enemies in battle. I mean, they do a ton of palette swaps, as you know, pretty much immediately after the first section of the game, but they are pretty lovingly designed, and like even the wilting, damaged version can be kind of charming. Like the tree will have a bandage on it, and it's like, is that like you have a different a product made from you helping to mend you on your dying body?
I did have mixed feelings about. I think the first time you encounter it, it's called either like a mage or a wizard. But it's like an old man in like a wizard robe with a big long beard, and he's floating, and there's like floating orbs. But then his like hurt state is his hood is down, so you can see his face, and he's like on the ground holding up a hand as if he's like begging you to stop hurting him. And not to stray into mechanics too much, but like some of the enemies can heal themselves, and when they heal themselves, their sprite switches back. So like you hit him and he like falls to the ground and he's like, no, stop. And then he heals himself and he like floats back up, and now he's levitating, and he's got like the crystal balls levitating around his head again. And so then you hit him and then he goes back into his weakened state. And so it's just like, I want to just kill this old man. Like, I feel bad that I'm just endlessly abusing this old man because I can't leave the fight and he won't die. So he's just like trapped in this purgatory. Jarring is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So yeah, the enemy sprites, but you know, when we're thinking about the battle graphics, like it's another like if I do the comparison to Phantasy Star, that this game really shows how let's just say efficient the design is, but like your character doesn't approach, which I know prior to Final Fantasy 7 or I guess 6 and 5 might have done some of this, but your character didn't really like run across the screen and actually co-locate, other than like with some exceptions.
Yeah, there's some like abilities and stuff where you'll fly
or
over
some
there,
of the summons might go and hit them. But in this game, your character just kind of insinuates that he did something, and then a magical weapon swipes over the enemy. And that's another thing that was like, yeah, they just didn't want to spend the time to design those extra animations, or you know, for the budget or the goals of this game. The design document was like, that's not making the scope. And Phantasy Star 2 definitely animates your character up there using the weapon they have. And it's just, it's a nice richness that if you're going to do this perspective on your battle, why not have your character
do a
little more?
I just realized when you said that word, that's why the battles look so weird. It's the perspective, because in Phantasy Star, I feel so bad that it's like, here's this older game that did a lot of these things visually, but way better. In Phantasy Star, your sprites are in the foreground, and then the enemies are like off in the field. So it's like you are your characters, but it's also kind of like you're down there with them, like looking over their shoulders. And then when they attack, if they have like a melee weapon, there's like a whole little animation of them being up where the enemies are, which creates a really clear sense of depth. And like, we're here and they're there, and I rush in and attack, and then I fall back and we regroup. In Mystic Quest, your sprites in combat are the same as your sprites on the overworld, which is fine and par for the course in Final Fantasy, but because you are now in the foreground and the monsters are supposed to be in, you know, like in the far distance on the battlefield, they are huge, which means like the thing that is supposed to be further away has this like weird reverse perspective where the characters are closer but seem smaller and more distant. And I think that is the problem, is that the size creates this expectation that these things are at one distance when actually they're at another. Whereas when they're side by side and you have the heroes on the right, like every other Final Fantasy, and then the monsters on the left, the fact that the monsters are huge is just like understood to be because they want to show them in more detail. But here, the forced perspective is like, well, you can't do both of these things at the same time. Like, you need to also make the heroes be in more detail and sized properly, which again, Phantasy Star does.
Yeah. Or if you even want to like reference Punch Out, where Little Mac is way smaller than any of the boss fights the game that Punch Out is. But at least in there, I can see like, I can defend it a little more of like, you need to see more of the screen to like react. You don't want to block your view in an action game when you need to dodge and do things. And also it kind of fits the story of like, well, Little Mac is an underdog. He's up against boxers that they should absolutely destroy him.
Yeah. I also like I'm sure someone who understands the art better could explain this, but Little Mac is literally smaller, right? Whereas I don't think Benjamin is supposed to be tiny, right? It's
not this much smaller.
Right. The difference in size feels ridiculous. Like, oh, if he's a normal sized person, then all of these monsters are like the size of buildings, right?
They're Shadow
huge.
of the Colossus bosses.
Yes. Yeah, which I don't think that's what they were going for.
All 20 of these toads in this little battle zone are colossi.
The only other thing I have to say about just the pure audio visuals is, and this is a really small one, but I kind of like the speech boxes or text bubbles where they like point to the person speaking. I think in a long, like a Final Fantasy, 4, 5, or 6 style, like long narrative conversation, that would get tiring to have to look at that small visual indicator to see who is speaking, instead of having like, Edgar : and then him speaking. But I think it actually kind of fits. It fits with the amount of story there is. It fits with like the kind of more simplistic, we want to make it really obvious to someone who is speaking, and there's going to be a lot less dialogue. So it's not the way I would want it in a more complex or narrative rich game, but I think for this one it actually works pretty well. Like that was actually a very small change that felt like a pretty wise choice.
Are you saying this is not a narrative rich game?
I am. I didn't mean to damn it with faint praise, but like the way you convey text matters depending on the volume, and there is a lower volume in this than most Final Fantasies.
Yeah, I have a few other like visual notes that they may not like rise into a giant point, but kind of speak to the rush job or the efficiency job of what went into this game. Like when you're in the sand cave or whatever it's called, and there's like these drifting sand tiles that the way they're animated to be moving has nothing to do with which way they're going to send you. So like when you step on them, it's kind of like, oh, you stepped on the wrong tile, you're getting reset back to the beginning of the area. And it's like, looks like it's moving left, but actually, nope, the river's going the other way. And that was just kind of jarring.
I did actually get caught by that, because when you first go into that dungeon, I thought, oh, they want me to step on it because then it will show me we're going to have puzzles that make you, step onto the right flow of sand and not the wrong flow of sand. No.
There's a lot of those like games literacy things where you'd come into like, oh, are they gonna? And then like the answer is nah. Like they have you very scenically bomb out like the spinal column of a fossil, and then the next screen or two screens later, you're walking through one of those spinal columns and you can just step out sideways from it and you don't have to bomb a different one. It's just like nothing. And it's just like, why even hint at like a Zelda style mechanic of, oh, I gotta bomb things, and then like, just kidding, it doesn't matter, nothing matters.
There are also a couple places where you can essentially cross through a wall, and that is not visually indicated in any way. And this isn't like, oh, you know how sometimes in Final Fantasy there are secrets? It's like, no, you have to go this way. And there's no visual indicator. There's nothing to like funnel you toward the wall. And thank God they don't do that often. But there was a minute in one of the early dungeons where I was like, am I going to have to Doom style go around and hump all the walls to figure out how to get through the game? And luckily you don't.
I remember it happens in the first time you're in the focus tower after you beat the sand area. The big wizard guy. I don't remember his name.
I think it's Big Wizard Guy.
Oh, okay. Cowering as you kill him. There's like a invisible little skip to actually get to him that is, it's not the hardest thing to stumble into, but there's like a whole loop of nothing on that same floor. And it's kind of like, why make these like empty office buildings to like walk around and then find nothing? And that's kind of how I feel about most of the towns. Before we get to gameplay though, let's see what else. So yeah, that spinal column thing, the animation of the sand. There's like a clear difference between like treasures that have something important and like the little pots with lids that are like just a cure every time, or some gold or something. That
unfortunately is only true about 90% of the time, which means you end up having to check every single treasure, because what if this is one of the ones that they put in a pot instead of in like the big cool treasure chest? But I agree that they obviously were trying to make it clear, this is treasure you should grab and this is treasure you can skip if you want to, but then they do not stick the landing.
Yeah. Your character keeps doing this like fourth wall breaking shrug at you, and it just like, is it meant to be like a Ferris Bueller thing? Like, what's going on here? Like, it doesn't seem like invested in enough to like, I don't really understand what he's doing, and he like sits and does it for so long.
It's the slowness, I think, right? Because Final Fantasy VI has like the finger wag, you know, and the way I always interpreted the little cutesy animations in Final Fantasy VI is they are turning to camera in the way like a stage performer or a TV performer would have to turn to the camera so that the audience can see, but that they are clearly talking to each other, right? This absolutely feels like a fourth wall breaking, like and it's the only animation that has like the big hands. Like it's, it's, you could tell someone was like, believe it? We have to give this character some character, like some visual, like stylistic character flourishes. And then that was the only one they did. That was the only one that got budget approved.
It's just him failing upwards over and over. Like, guess I'm the hero. Even though literally every partner that joins me is way stronger than me, I'm the hero.
Yeah, I'll have a lot to say about the two-party system.
The other thing is, so we'll get into mechanics later, but there's a sound effect when you swing your sword. For any of your items on the overworld have a sound effect, but the sword one is intense and loud and should not be that way. It has no restraint. Where like in Zelda, it's like if you hit something that is giving you a huge amount of feedback, it might have like a very unique or jarring sound, or be a secret, or be a weak wall or something. And this is like every time you swing, it's like swing, like it's like it's the title screen with the sword falling into the Z. Like every time
it totally
you swing.
is. It's like they just cribbed that sound and they were like, that's a good sound. We're going to use that one.
Let's use it every single time you swing the sword.
Yeah, and I think that
just
includes combat, doesn't it?
I can't remember if it's in combat, but it's definitely on the
Yeah.
And it's just excessive. And I mean, I know I'm like a misophoniac, but that one jarred me. I was just like, ugh.
Yeah, it's they really wanted you to never be questioning if like you had done a thing, right? Because the jump has like a whoop, and each different tool has a different, the sword and the axe, even though they are similar and should probably make similar whooshy noises, they super don't, right? Like everything has a really distinctive sound so that it's clearly identifiable, but I would not call it pleasant. It's not a like a well-designed sound. It is more like an alarm. Like you have used the sword.
Yeah, it's the worst one. Like when the axe cuts a tree, it's satisfying. It's a good sound, but
thunk. Yeah,
that sword one's got to go. It's nothing like in Link to the Past just to again murder this game by comparing it to way better games. It's not just that even the normal sword, like the whiff of air slash, is like perfect. It's like, the way your sword gets deeper after you temper it.
Yeah.
You get the red sword or the final sword, and it's like this, for some reason, it's like a base slash, and it works. It feels so good.
I think Zelda specifically and Nintendo generally are really good about like the musicality of their sound effects. There's just a lot of thought and care that goes into it. And these are just like the sound effects in this game are just like the graphics. Like we did it. Like we C-, we completed the assignment exactly as described. Can I please go home now? And
it does have kind of like a student senior project kind of feel where like in that context, you'd be like, wow, you put a whole game together.
Yes.
But coming from Squaresoft, you're like, oh, why are you publishing a student project?
And that is why I think it's like, it feels so bizarre, is because I suspect the people that they put on this game could have made a different Final Fantasy, but they were only given like the time or the authority or the budget or whatever to produce this Final Fantasy, or worse, some penny pincher specifically directed them like, no, I know you're a talented artist. That's not what I want, please. I want you need to churn out these graphics in this oppressive amount of time or under, this certain, dollar amount or whatever. And that's not really a knock on the creators themselves. Like, I don't mean for it to be, I don't think that you mean for it to be, but like, there is no denying that the final product feels very freshman effort, and coming from Squaresoft, it's like, guys, what? I literally know you're better than this. I own other games that you have made that are better than this. They even have similar words on the box. We ready for gameplay?
I'm still waiting for gameplay. Yeah, this where to start? Well, I mean, like, it's easy to start with the big summary. Like, this game is not challenging to like a ridiculous degree. It's not just that what it asks you to do is easy, it's that what it asks you to do is like the only thing you can do. And even if the few little ways you can fail are instantly not failure. Like if you die in a battle, it's just like, do you want to just do that again? And we'll just pretend you didn't die instantly. And like, there's just, when you get like a new piece of armor or whatever, it just replaces what you had. There's no equipping. The few choices you can make don't really matter.
Yeah. So I want to jump on that, the retrying if you die in a battle one, because the fact that the game lets you save anywhere. You could be standing right in front of a boss, which, oh, by the way, all the monsters are on the overworld map, right? No random encounters. We'll talk about that.
Mhm.
But like, you could be standing right in front of the final boss and save right then. And then if you turn off the Super Nintendo and pull the cartridge out and then put it back in and turn the Super Nintendo back on, like, you will be right there. So that, and the if you die in a battle, you can retry the battle instead of getting kicked back for hours, or God forbid, realizing you haven't saved in ages and you're like, oh my God, I lost so much time. I actually thought that was very like modern friendly. But then the flip side of that is, if it's really easy to die in Celeste, but you spawn instantly, like those two sides of the coin have to go together, right? You respawn instantly because you're going to be dying a lot. And then you don't lose a bunch of time. In this, you respawn instantly at the start of the battle. And I think you are in whatever condition you started the battle in. So I don't think it just like restores your health and everything. If you came in with half health, you start the battle with half health. The problem is the amount of randomness in the combat system is staggering. Like you can get, I called it stun or soft lock, but it's basically status locked, where the enemies will just put you to sleep and then beat you to death, or they will paralyze you and then beat you to death, or they will put you into whatever status where you can't respond and then beat you to death. So having the instant start the battle back over thing starts to feel a lot more like, you're going to die randomly and there's going to be nothing you can do to prevent it. And it's going to feel really punishing. So we just won't make the penalty very steep. And I was like, I don't know how to feel about this emotionally, because I like the idea of saying the battles are going to be hard and they're going to be mechanically complicated. And so if you die, we will let you try the battle again instead of making you like walk through the whole dungeon again, like Final Fantasy IV would have done. Right. But it's not hard and it's not complicated. It's just sometimes you hold A and you win instantly, and other times you don't even get to take a turn and you're just beaten to death while you're soft locked. And it's like that. This is what are you doing?
You just have a locked body syndrome and you're just watching people kill you.
It's really, really brutal in some ways.
Yeah, and the status thing is extra brutal because you don't have like a 4 or 5 person party. It's just 2. And yeah, it's sort of like, I guess we're just drawing cards and seeing what I get every single time. It doesn't feel like, oh man, I want to try a different approach to this battle. It's more like, I'll see if the game will just let me proceed this time.
Yes, that was the exact feeling I had. Was like, I would get to a boss and I was just like, are you going to let me win? Because I don't feel like I really have much of a hand in this. Like, if the boss rolls 20s and I roll 1s, I can't use my wicked cunning to say like, oh, well, if I have this loadout and I use these spells, or if I do this or whatever, it's just like, I don't know. We're flipping coins. And if I get heads 4 times in a row, I win. And if he gets head 4 times in a row, he wins. And that's how the battle's decided.
And like, to kind of betray the, like, it's not even that it's maybe just the lack of time or investment to like make this richer. But the very first battle in the game, which is basically a story battle, after it, you just show up on a mountain and there's no explanation of anything and you have to fight something. And I died in that battle. And in that battle, you can only attack or defend, and you have no healing items. And there's no plot armor story protection. And it's like, this is literally, there was no different way I could have played this, and I lost. What are you trying to teach me as a beginner RPG player? That life is hard and it's not fair.
That I love, like the like layered narrative of, I don't know why I'm on this mountain. I don't know why I'm chasing this old man who's on a cloud up this mountain. And then suddenly there's a monster and I die.
Yeah.
And like, this is supposed to be my entry into the Final Fantasy series.
Yeah. I think your character even like stares you straight into the camera and says, "Who is that guy anyway?" in that scene. And like my reaction was like, "I don't know, you tell me, game. You showed up here with no explanation on the hill of destiny."
It absolutely, I was so like, okay, I'm going to try and be open-minded about this, that like it didn't occur to me how utterly absurd the opening is. Like once I got kind of into a rhythm, I was like, wow, a lot of this is just asking me to really suspend my disbelief. But, I was just like, okay, this is like, it's like a children's book, right? Yes, a lot of children's stories are ridiculous, but even children's stories don't usually just throw you into the premise with no explanation of any kind. And I guess, spoilers, it turns out that the old man is the crystal of light, like as an avatar. And so that is, he's been guiding you. And I suppose because that is the last thing you find out after you defeat the final boss, that they want you to like tie those things together, that you were drawn to him by light magic, but they could have, maybe spelled that out a little bit. He could have had a line of dialogue that was like, oh, I've never been up here on Destiny Hill, but I felt today like I had a dream and I just had to come up here. And then, there's the earthquake and then the old man and the monster. And like, then it would have been more like, oh man, but why did I feel compelled to go up there? But he's just like out for a stroll and then Destiny happens.
Hi, I'm Benji. And I'm just Jim from The Office staring at the camera going, why am I here? What is this? Yeah, I mean, this game really made me think about, like, I've heard creative people talk about, like, or designers too, not necessarily like art, like the difference between like simple and simplistic, or like when something is like beautifully simple versus dumb and mundane. And this, unfortunately, is that second category where, like, I was trying to think of analogies, like if Mario is too hard and Nintendo released a Mario where there's no pits, enemies, or anything, like even like maybe you can still jump, but if you ran into a wall, you would just go through it. And it's just like, how long would you play that game? And like maybe there's a pit, but you actually don't fall. And it's like maybe you have a noble intention to make Mario more accessible, but the result is not a game worth playing. And or like, if piano is too hard to learn, well, now there's only one key, and just tap it over and over and the song will play. And someone might sort of like that for a moment, and then eventually I'm like, what if I had a music device where I press play once and then the song plays? Oh, that's just listening to music now.
Well, and that's I think I coincidentally just saw a thing about like different styles of music notation, and so many alternative music notations specifically talk about how hard it is to read music and how that is why people bounce off learning an instrument. It's like, no, it's not. There's a million other reasons people give up, and it's not because music notation is inscrutable, right? It is a thing you have to learn, but that is not the most difficult part about learning an instrument, right? And so a lot of the simplified systems, the problem that they have is, even if they are decent, like Guitar Tablature, right, which is an excellent simplified system, its main drawback is that it does not ever have a way to convert you to music notation, right? Like you can be an excellent guitar player and only ever read Guitar Tablature, but you will never graduate to, traditional music notation. And this feels like that, right? Nothing about this actually prepares you for what we think of as like a 16-bit era JRPG. It looks like one, and you use the same controller, and it has a lot of the same trappings, but you would not come out of this and understand like elemental weakness system. You would not come out of this and understand like statuses that you might be able to do anything about and how they can like change the tide of battle like in your favor or against you. Like it's just press A to win, except sometimes you lose, but then press A enough times and eventually you'll
Life's
win. Like
a bitch, deal with it.
Eventually you will get your 4 coin flips in a row, and it just, there's no on ramp except to the aesthetics. Like there's no on ramp to the actual mechanics.
It doesn't speak to why you would like to play an RPG. Like the surgery they did on it to make it easy also got rid of the stuff that's great about RPGs, like an actual story. And so I have a few just random gripes. So I already talked about the mountain one where he's like, who is that guy? And I'm like, I don't know, game, you tell me. But the other one is like, so like one of the first missions you do with your companion Kaylee gets sick because a minotaur like poisons her, and then eventually you get the elixir in a later chapter and you bring it back to her, and her like she's, of course it's an RPG town, so there's like 2 houses, and
yes.
This character must be the aristocrat that lives in one of the houses and everyone else just lives outside. But the mom who like screams at you to go save her kid, and like you go give her the cure, and there's a funny bit of dialogue where she's like, now I can go see Spencer in the other town, and your character says, what if I went and just looked around first? And it's like, it doesn't sound like the way a human would ever talk in that situation of like, yeah, but what if I go to the town that you already are familiar with and I looked around?
Because
then,
the person holding the controller needs something to do.
Yeah. But then like I walked back down and talked to the mom, and the message in her box when you press A on her, it just says, bye now. No, thank you. You saved my daughter's life. Or it just says, bye now.
There is a lot of that. There's a lot of moments that can be summed up as, you needed more words here, right? Like, I know that the game was stripped way down, and it was originally written in Japanese, and translation at this time in history is hard and not good, but they were not even trying to have like rich, deep, interesting characters. I'm sure the original Japanese is not that much better. It is probably whatever the Japanese equivalent of by now is.
I'm going to guess it like wasn't even Japanese first. I'm going to guess it was just written this badly in English.
You might actually be right. Maybe this was written in English first, because I mean, it was made for an American audience.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Couple other gripes you may have more is like they let you, this is a pet peeve, not every RPG does this, but even if you have full health, it lets you waste cure and waste magic, and it's just annoying to be like, if I'm just mashing A to heal myself, just stop it once I'm topped up. It doesn't matter because the game is so easy. It's never like a problem. Like I ran out of cures. And also, like, every pot that has cures in it respawns if you leave and go back in an area.
That feels like such a, parent playing a sport with their kid and just, like, letting them get a goal, right? Just like, oh, man, when I came back in here, like, the chest had treasure in it again, right? And, like, yes, a child would be delighted by Peekaboo, but for anyone with any level of games literacy, it's just like, but why? Like, why is the chest refilled?
And it's annoying if it's like, oh, I want to make sure I get everything. Oh, I
better not
need to
leave
remember
and come back.
if I've already checked that one.
Which is a thing they do with monsters that I thought was like, I'm not totally sure what balance they're trying to strike, because monsters, there's no random encounters on the overworld, but there are these areas called battlefields, and the battlefields are just 10 scripted encounters in a row. And as far as I can tell, they exist to ensure you have enough experience to like be the right level. But then inside of a dungeon, there's monsters that are like fixed, and they do the little march in place, which I kind of like. I actually think no random encounters is something they probably should have gotten into sooner and stuck with. But that, you know, again, it's like, they were so close and then like their wings melted and they did not, you know, they did not fly on safely. But the monsters don't respawn in a dungeon unless you leave. So if you leave and come back into the dungeon, then all the monsters are there. And you never have a reason to return to a dungeon after you've gone through there once. So you might not even notice that that happens. But again, with my games literacy, that did make me say, like, is this how you grind in this game? Do I have to clean out a dungeon, leave, and then clean out the dungeon again? Surely that cannot be what they expect me to do. And it's not. But you do get into this weird situation where, like, I think one of the dungeons, like, you can get poisoned real easily, and like I didn't have enough heals or something. There was something there. I had a reason to leave, and I came back, and that was when I saw like all the monsters were back again, and I was like, okay, that's annoying, right? And then you just, you know, press A to win your way through the dungeon, and it was more of like an inconvenience than an actual like challenge to be overcome. But it just feels confusing, I guess, where it's like, okay, there's no random encounters and the battlefields don't regenerate, but the dungeons do, but you never need to grind. You always have more than enough power minus the insane randomness. Like, it just, I don't know how someone with like no games literacy would feel about those dynamics, or if they would even notice. But with my like fairly sophisticated games literacy, I was like, I don't know how you want me to feel. Like, what am I supposed to be interacting with?
It's just like, it's just not thoughtful. Like, it doesn't really speak to, I just keep trying to think of analogies. Like, if you wanted someone to like be inspired to play a sport like basketball, and you show them a court, and then you just like some of the pieces, but just out of context and without any purpose or meaning to like accomplishing anything. And then it's like, yeah, don't you want to play basketball now? And it's like, I'm still not even sure what basketball is. Or if you were hoping to make me want to play basketball, this is not how to do it. You release a game and you describe it as baby food, and that might be fine for babies, and maybe you're not lying to me that it's a baby food game. But the weird part is that you're saying you're going to get excited about fancy sushi if you play this game. And it's like, no, I'm not.
Yeah, and that's why I legitimately wonder, like, if this was somebody's first JRPG, maybe they were just like, oh, okay. It's like, all right, so there's battles and magic, and like there's a story where you save the world, and it's like, yes, in that reductive sense, yes, it has all of the things. But going back to this was like a very bizarre experience, because Final Fantasy 1 for the Nintendo is rough in some game ruining ways, but in a very different way than I felt like this game was ruined.
But man, it's trying stuff.
It is. It's trying stuff. This is the opposite. This is trying not to do stuff.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know. It's, you stepped into like a empty, half designed version of it, and
in a lot of ways,
hollowed
this
out.
actually, yeah, in a lot of ways, this actually plays. It looks and plays like a mobile game, right? Like a phone game, because you basically just press A to win. I mean, God, your second player defaults to, or your second party member defaults to auto battle, where they will just heal you and cure status ailments and do stuff. So like, you don't even have to control them, which is just, oh my God. But like, there's so little interaction and there's so little menuing and complexity that you could absolutely play this with your thumb on like a smartphone screen. And then little things like being able to save anywhere, and if you die in a battle, you just pick up exactly where you were. Like, that's very, I might only be able to play this for 5 minutes while I'm standing in line at the DMV, you know, like maybe that's actually part of the reason I personally felt so negative about this on this attempt at playing through it is because it feels exactly like the kind of experience I hate. And granted, I'm in no way the target audience for this, but that didn't somehow make my experience better. Just saying like, I'm not, this poison isn't meant for me, so it's not poisoning me. Like, no, it was still poisoning me.
Yeah, like to sum it up, like I can't think of who I would recommend this game to. It like this, the tiny category is you love Final Fantasy and you just have a passion for playing every single one. In which case, you already know about this game. You don't need me to tell you that it sucks, but go ahead, play it.
Well, that I think that's a beautiful segue into asking whether or not it held up. And the answer is obviously no. Full nostalgia goggles required, but you phrased it beautifully. Who would I recommend this to? Somebody who already likes it and no one else. Because the people who requested this game and that I've talked about this game with, like, they have super fond memories of this game and they have played it recently and enjoyed playing it recently. And I am not yucking their yum. I don't understand it, but there's lots of food that people like that I don't like, right? And so it's not harmful. Like, playing this isn't worse than playing anything else if you are enjoying it, because enjoyment is a subjective thing. But could I ever recommend this to anyone else? Absolutely not. Like, unless you want essentially like an academic, like, what is the difference between Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy Mystic Quest? Well, play Final Fantasy IV for 10 minutes and play Final Fantasy Mystic Quest for 10 minutes, and you will immediately understand all of the things that you give up when you rip out these mechanics one by one. The auto-equipping thing that you mentioned, fun fact, if you miss a piece of equipment, since there are exactly the right amount of armors and shields and helmets, holy crap, are you screwed, right? Because you don't have the thing they expected you to have, for which there is no substitute. So like, now instead of your defense being like 20 when they expected it to be 20, it's only like 12, and all of the damage is calibrated for 20, right? Or you're expected to do X amount of damage with the better sword. So like, there's just so many little things where it's like, there's not enough game for it to be a game, but there's not so little game that I could say it's like, oh, well, it's a visual novel, right? Like it's a game with like big air quotes.
Well, and that example you just described is a deep irony to a beginner's RPG, that it's that unforgiving for missing something.
Yeah. And it's not like they ever say like, oh man, the monster's here, right? Turn to the camera and say, whoa, the monsters here are real scary. I should see if I can find a better sword or stronger armor. Like, those kinds of like baby's first video game things where they kind of pull you along by the hand, like, those are insulting if you have seasoned games literacy. But the only reason I recognized, oh, I am getting trounced, is because I knew I should not be getting trounced, right? Like, someone with no games literacy might just be like, I guess I'm bad at this.
I guess I should never play an RPG again.
The curtain falls, the music plays, the credits roll, then it all fades to black, and you're left by yourself. The fanfare is gone, there's no player 2 there by your side to share victories won. But as you slowly progress down the hall to your bed, a few great events leak back into your head from the time that you spent traversing the land, battling evil, fighting the darkness, just sword in hand. Your memories creep in with the edge of a smile. You realize again what you lost for a while. You're gonna think back much less on how you saved the day than on all the experience